Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Historic Nashville Annual Meeting. I'm Elizabeth Elkins, and as you know, we usually hold our annual meeting in January. This year, we kind of kept postponing it, hoping things would work out where we could get together, not virtually, but we're glad to very much have you all join us here in December of 2021. I have to say, it's been an absolutely remarkable 2 years to have ended up as president of Historic Nashville. The challenges that we've faced as an organization have certainly been numerous. Things you all know about very well in Nashville, from the tornado to the pandemic, and then the pandemic to the 2nd Avenue bombing. During this last 2 years, I've learned so much about H&I, and I hope there are some new changes that have happened over the last year and will continue throughout 2022 that really bolster the strengths of our organization. The March 22, 2020 tornado destroyed our easement property at 624 Jefferson Street. And when that building came down, it sort of set off a chain of events in my mind of construction and change in Nashville. And there in Germantown, I feel like that moment really forever altered the historic feel of Germantown. And then on Christmas Day of that year, the bomber caused damage to 7 of Historic Nashville's easement properties. It affected 115 2nd Avenue, 135 2nd Avenue, both of which have been repaired, and then 170 through 178 2nd Avenue. 170 has almost been completely lost, and the fate of the other 4 properties remain up in the air, even here we are a year later. These many challenges have helped H&I better understand the importance of our easements program as a preservation tool, as well as a little bit better understanding of how the city government and varied organizations view our easements and preservation for the city as a whole. I think it's easy to get caught up in those challenges and those losses we've experienced, but instead, I would love to talk about the positive changes that we've seen here at H&I since I last talked to you, which was in January of 2020, at the Hermitage Hotel. In that period, we've added 5 new easement properties, including the Getty's Fire Hall. And very importantly are of utmost importance, these next 3 things, and that's the new staff members that we've brought on to Historic Nashville. First, we hired an easement staff member to look after our easement properties, and that's Caroline Eller. We also, just in the last few months, have finally added an administrative staff member in Ashley Cole. And we also have new legal representation in the amazing Miranda Christie, who has certainly been on hand through the craziness of all of the 2nd Avenue stuff. Also, we launched the Music Row Trust Program under the guidance of the incredible Trey Bruce. And this program is designed to purchase properties in Music Row in that neighborhood and also support the owners who choose to repair and renovate their historic structures. This program got a little sidelined as we went into the pandemic, but it's beginning to pick up steam again. And I really see moving forward into the years ahead that this could be a very important thing for the future of Music Row and its history. So as we move into 2022 and stepping away now, I've been involved with the organization for 6 years. My hope is that things continue to grow and along this path. The new board members are fantastic. They're bringing great ideas and a lot of new energy to the board. And our proposed new president, Brian Mansfield, has perhaps some of the greatest knowledge of Nashville's history, in particular music history, and a good understanding of Nashville's growth challenges. So again, I'm so excited that for the first time in a very long time, Historic Nashville has 2 staff members who will help support the work of the volunteer board. Before I turn things over to one of those new staff members, I'd like to ask that you all vote to approve our 2022 board slate and officers. I think Ashley's going to put up a slide with those officers you'll see there, as well as the board slate. And you'll get a poll that'll come up on your Zoom, and if you can just vote to approve, disapprove, or abstain. And that this poll will stay up for a few minutes, so please do take a moment over the next, I would say, 10 minutes or so to make sure you cast your vote. For now, I'd like to welcome our new easement staff member who certainly jumped right into the fire, beginning work with H&I this year. Here's Caroline Eller to tell you more about H&I's Preservation Easements Program.
Good evening. My name is Caroline Eller, and I serve as H&I's Easements Coordinator. Tonight, I'd like to provide the membership with updates on our recent work in the Preservation Easements Program and provide detailed updates on several individual H&I easement properties. I will also share exciting plans for Rutledge Hill and the status of our 2nd Avenue easement properties damaged by last year's Christmas Day bombing. First, a quick overview of H&I's Preservation Easements Program and the benefits of donating an easement. A preservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement that protects a significant historic or cultural resource. An easement provides assurance to the owner of a historic or cultural property that the property's intrinsic values will be preserved through subsequent ownership. In addition, the owner may obtain substantial tax benefits. Qualified properties must be listed in the National Register of Historic Places or be certified as historic properties by the National Park Service and the Department of Interior. Preservation easements prohibit demolition and unapproved alterations. H&I's 6-member easements committee is responsible for reviewing alterations requests and ensuring that approved changes meet the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, a nationally recognized historic preservation standard. Many of our easement agreements date to the 1980s. Our earliest agreement dates to 1982 and was placed on 115 2nd Avenue North. We currently hold 27 easements, which protect 31 buildings. Since H&I's last annual meeting, we have added 4 new agreements that cover 6 properties in Rutledge Hill, including 4 former residences, the James Geddes Fire Hall, and an air rights agreement for the Hermitage Cafe property. H&I's easement committee has been very busy in 2021. We reviewed alterations requests for 4 individual easement properties, in addition to participating in ongoing discussions and reviews related to recovery on 2nd Avenue. We completed annual easement inspections this fall and mailed those to owners along with recommendations for repairs. We developed new alterations requests and guidance forms for owners of easement properties to help streamline our review process. Finally, we reviewed and signed on to an amicus brief filed with the IRS, which details a position held by numerous easement holding organizations who believe that facade easements and conveyance of development rights should be recognized as separate and distinctly valued rights. The brief stated that a donee must hold both the air rights and non-air rights to preserve maximally the building's historic qualities and prevent development of, on, or around the building. Numerous other easement holding organizations from across the nation signed onto this brief. It's important to highlight the fact that despite the pandemic, several of H&I's easement properties are undergoing major historic rehabilitations and redevelopment. These actions, when done properly and sensitively, help ensure long-term use and thus protection of these historic buildings. The former YWCA building on 7th Avenue North, built in 1911, is an excellent example of this approach. An easement was placed on the property in 2019, and the owners are currently rehabilitating the building into a 53-unit hotel using federal historic tax credits, a program overseen by the Tennessee Historical Commission and the National Park Service. The Easements Committee reviewed minor exterior work earlier this year, including vent hood replacements and paint for the iron railings. Interior work for this project calls for new flooring and ceilings to replace non-historic versions of the same and new systems throughout. The current anticipated completion date on this project is March 2022. The Hermitage Hotel, built between 1908 and 1910, is also undergoing several changes. Interior work includes updates to guest rooms and suites, which should be completed in early 2022. The hotel restaurant has been revamped and was reopened in November as Druzy and Dar under the leadership of a world-renowned chef. Additionally, the hotel kitchen has been replaced and a new cafe called the Pink Hermit is being built nearest the front entrance. Additional attention has been paid to the ladies' room to rival the famous Art Deco men's room, and restoration has occurred in the lobby, ballroom, and other public spaces. As part of the development plans for the new cafe, hotel management reached out to the easements committee in early 2021 to discuss plans for new ground level canopies and a new entrance to the cafe. Original plans called for the removal of a pedestrian door and storefront entrance sited just north of the main entrance, as property representatives believe this to be a non-historic entrance modeled after an original design. The storefront window and pedestrian door were to be replaced with a large glass double door, which the easements committee felt was too modern for the architecture of this newly designated National Historic Landmark. After reviewing on-site details and historical records, H&I determined that the storefront entrance was in fact historic, differing from designs and materials seen in newer openings to its north. Detailed floral motif moldings and a Chippendale style motif in the bulkhead indicated this as a significantly older, if not an original storefront to the building. Through this research, H&I was able to successfully advocate for the storefront's retention and incorporation into redevelopment plans. The Wilcox or Hitchcock building at 526-530 Church Street is currently being rehabilitated into a boutique hotel named the Maddox Hotel. This hotel is locally owned and managed. There are 6 floors, and each floor is one unit, themed modern industrial, rustic lodge, honky tonk, and chillax. The 7th floor has a penthouse that rents with that unit and will have an outdoor patio space. Exterior repainting, which is currently underway, should be completed in the next few days. Each unit in the Maddox has 6 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, a kitchenette, game room, and a large common area. Units are uniquely themed, as are the bedrooms and bathrooms. Every unit has social media, original mural art, and art from globally recognized artist A.D. Maddox. Property representatives work with the easements committee and the MHZC to determine historically appropriate colors for the exterior repainting. The building was painted prior to the easement. The committee also worked closely on the design for a new blade sign to be installed at the southwest corner of the building. An initial design called for a sign that was dissimilar to documented historical precedent in terms of its location and scale. The 1936 image shown here was used as reference for the committee's guidance, and a new pedestrian scaled sign is now planned. Placement has also been moved to a wall location that will not damage historic masonry. Icon Entertainment Group, owners of the Southern Turf building, recently announced planned rehabilitation work for this prominent downtown edifice. 3 new projects may open as soon as July 2022. This includes plans for the ground level Sinatra Bar and Lounge, which is a Frank Sinatra themed venue under development for 2 years and approved by Sinatra family members. The Southern Turf Lofts, which are 6 short-term luxury rental residences on the 2nd and 3rd floors with 14-foot ceilings, full kitchens, and laundry facilities. The rendering shown here courtesy of Icon Entertainment Group. And the Southern Turf Club, a members-only bar in the 4th floor penthouse that will pay homage to the original Southern Turf Saloon in the building from 1895 to 1914. The Rutledge Hill Historic District lies about 1/2 mile to the southeast of downtown Nashville on a bluff above the Cumberland River. Once an elegant residential neighborhood, this district is the last remaining cluster of 19th century buildings in the area. The National Register listed James Geddes Engine Company No. 6, a Victorian era firehouse, stands nearby on 2nd Avenue South. In 2020, GBX Group acquired 4 former residences within the district located at 42 Rutledge Street, 28 Middleton Street, 30 Middleton, and 40 Middleton, as well as the firehouse. GBX moved quickly to place preservation easements on these properties through H&I. The properties will be rehabilitated into an elegant boutique dispersed hotel concept with gardens, 20 to 25 guest rooms, restaurants at the Geddes Firehouse and former Hermitage Cafe, and a hotel lobby centrally located at 28 Middleton Street. H&I is working closely with GBX to ensure historically appropriate rehabilitations and redevelopment for these 6 easement properties. Perhaps the easement properties of most interest to H&I membership are those on 2nd Avenue North that were devastated by the 2020 Christmas Day bombing. Minor damage occurred to easement properties at 115 and 135 2nd Avenue North, and 180 2nd Avenue North sustained window damage on its facade. Unfortunately, the brunt of destruction resulting from this event impacted 4 easement protected buildings at 170 to 176 2nd Avenue North that were predominantly 1880s Italianate masonry structures. As excellent examples of Nashville's historic commercial architecture, the Historic American Building Survey, or HABS, documented these properties in 1970. In 1971, the 2nd Avenue Historic District was nominated to the National Register of Historic Places for its significant Victorian-era commercial architecture, deemed to be, quote, one of the most outstanding collections of cast iron and masonry storefronts remaining in America, end quote. Construction dates for these bomb-damaged easement properties range from circa 1875 to 1885. These buildings all lie within the 2nd Avenue Historic Preservation Overlay, the most restrictive type of local historic zoning district in Nashville. H&I's preservation easements and the local historic overlay, which is regulated by the Metro Historic Zoning Commission, are 2 independent preservation tools that help to ensure and guide appropriate alterations, and in this case, reconstruction. It was therefore critical to H&I that we exercise our legal interest in these properties by ensuring that the easements be retained and enforcing standards set forth in these agreements during recovery and reconstructive efforts. Within a few weeks of the bombing, the district and Metro Historical Commission Foundation partnered to create a community donations fund to aid in rebuilding efforts. Additional funding opportunities and technical guidance were provided to property owners to help with recovery and reconstruction. To further aid in recovery efforts, H&I assisted by compiling historic images, drawings, and other relevant files related to these properties, including those sourced from our baseline easement documentation and annual inspections, a demonstration of how helpful easements can be in the wake of disasters. The district and MHCF hired local preservation firm New South Associates to sort through and inventory the debris, with the aim of salvaging as much historic material as possible for incorporation into the rebuilds, especially architectural details and structurally viable brick. In early to mid 2021, the owners of these easement properties removed remaining sections of the obliterated facades and deconstructed masonry party walls back to a point of stability as determined by their engineers. According to them, this was done out of necessity for public safety. However, H&I had deep concerns that too much historic material had been removed. H&I applied for and received a $5,000 grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Daniel K. Thorne Intervention Fund, which provided for a structural analysis report for the affected easement properties from 170 to 176 2nd Avenue North. H&I hired local structural engineering firm Sandhu Consultants to perform an on-site assessment of the 4 most damaged properties. Masonry Solutions International, Inc., who specialize in historic masonry restoration, and Atkinson Noland Associates, historic masonry structural engineers and testing laboratory, also contributed findings to this report. For Metro's part, engineer Stephen J. Kelly, who has extensive international experience working with war-damaged historic buildings through his role with UNESCO, completed an additional and independent structural assessment report to determine the viability of remaining sections. In contrast to findings in an owner-funded structural assessment, both the Sandhu and Kelly reports concluded that remaining sections were in fact salvageable. That information was forwarded to the Metro Historic Zoning Commission and supports the position held by H&I that demolition is not necessary for remaining sections of 3 of these buildings. Several community engagement sessions were held in early 2021 through the Planning Commission. Community assistance has since included a benefit concert held in March that raised over $325,000, and Mayor Cooper's allocation of $500,000 in assistance for the economic recovery of 2nd Avenue. Urban Land Institute recommendations completed in April called for the complete removal of the destroyed 172 building and creation of a new open-air pedestrian connection to the riverfront in its place. Salvaged materials from the debris piles were moved to a metro lot in May to allow for safe sorting, which occurred during 2 workdays this fall. Hundreds of whole bricks and a few architectural elements were recovered during the salvage work. In October, the MHCC held a special called meeting to review the proposed specific site plans for 170 to 176 and actions related to immediate stabilization measures. This plan called for reconstruction on 2nd Avenue and selective demolition for repairs, but kept the remaining 1st Avenue elevations. The commission approved conceptual plans for the rebuilding, which requires council approval. If council approves the specific plan, MHCC will review the project for issuance of a permit in the coming months, once the owner has completed detailed plans. The terms of the facade easements require that they be repaired or reconstructed if they are damaged, unless there are not sufficient remaining insurance proceeds to accomplish that after repaying the loans on the property, in which case the liens are to be released. Owners of these properties have stated that there are not enough net insurance proceeds to complete this restoration and estimate that it will take around $30 million to restore and preserve these properties. As H&I reviewed these statements, we noted that draft reconstruction plans included rooftop additions, which may be historically inappropriate alterations and which contribute to these higher costs. Furthermore, it is H&I's position that several available financial incentives, including historic tax credits, the mayor's allocation fund, and a new local historic tax abatement program, if accessed, would make the project significantly more financially feasible. Due to the extensive damage to 172, the owner's proposal is to leave this footprint open to establish better connectivity between 1st and 2nd Avenues, as recommended by the ULI task force. All 4 of the 2nd Avenue facades are gone, and 3 will need to be rebuilt. 1st Avenue facades on 174 and 176 will need to be repaired. Through their legal counsel, the owners have indicated an intent to terminate all of the easements except for the 1st Avenue facade on 170, since it does not require extensive work. H&I has not agreed to this approach and believe there is a sound argument for retaining easements on 170, 174, and 176. Based on the structural reports, we are in agreement that the 172 building is unsalvageable and that easement should be terminated. It is also important to note that while H&I's easements extend to both the 2nd Avenue and 1st Avenue elevations, the river-facing walls are considered just as historically important and worthy of protection as the facades. The 2nd Avenue facades were known for their architectural significance, while warehouse-style 1st Avenue elevations reflect the commercial history of this district and of Nashville. This section is likely the best concentration of extant 19th century warehouses that illustrate Nashville's early dependence on river trade and commerce. For this reason, H&I is advocating just as strongly for continued protection and historically sensitive repairs of these elevations as we are for historically appropriate reconstruction along 2nd Avenue. H&I is diligently working with the property owners, their architects, and legal counsel to ensure that easements for the 3 salvageable buildings remain in full effect and shape the reconstructions as they were intended to. One early concern by staff and the easements committee was that this level of damage could cause the properties to be removed from the National Register of Historic Places. That designation a requirement for eligibility under Tennessee's conservation easement laws. However, the Tennessee Historical Commission has confirmed no plans to pursue delisting, so H&I is confident that easements can and should legally remain in place. The Easements Committee and H&I Board have also discussed the possibility of amended agreements that would only apply to the 1st Avenue elevations, but we do not see that as a necessary concession at this juncture. There is no local or state precedent to work from in this scenario, so we have maintained forward motion through frequent owner communications, consultation with state and national partners, and consideration for any plausible alternatives with regard to retaining these agreements in full. As the owners move forward with shoring and stabilization, we inch closer to the 1-year anniversary of this horrific event. H&I is committed to protecting the easement properties on 2nd Avenue North, just as it is committed to protecting all properties of historic, cultural, and architectural significance in Nashville and Davidson County. We will continue to provide guidance and work with property owners. We will continue to demand a seat at the table for difficult discussions surrounding the future of 2nd Avenue. We will continue to advocate for Nashville's unique places and stories that matter to everyone here tonight. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Carol Van West. Dr. West serves as the Tennessee State Historian and a professor and director of Middle Tennessee State University's Center for Historic Preservation. He is also a member of the National Historic Landmarks Committee and author of the book, Nashville Architecture.
What a horrific year you guys have gone through. But I can't help but take away from Caroline's presentation, what would we be without you guys here at the Historic Nashville, and what you have done and what you plan to do and what you're willing to commit to. Thank you, Caroline, for that report. It was very encouraging to me. Wasn't the least bit surprising, though. I know too many of you, we have worked together on too many projects over the decades, and your commitment to this city and your commitment to sound, sensible, reasonable preservation values and outcomes has always been paramount. And to me, that's what you guys have been talking about with Second Avenue. What happened there almost a year ago is horrific. And it was mindless, making it even doubly more frustrating and just makes you crazy what happened there. But because of the deranged actions of one, that doesn't mean that we throw away a history that dates to those buildings, to Nashville rebuilding itself after the Civil War. Those buildings are from the 1870s, a decade that I see as so important in Nashville's history because it is a decade of rebuilding. It was also a decade of violence. This was the time of reckoning with Reconstruction, and white supremacy was starting to once again show its fangs and to dominate so much of Nashville's life as it would in the decades to come during the Jim Crow period. But those buildings, those warehouses, the business they created was part of the recovery. And to me, they're fundamental to understanding the city today. So what you guys are doing, I just can salute. I think you do have to be resolute. You have to be determined. There might be decisions that have to be made because of the reality of the situation, but you don't have to rush into that. You obviously got a super strong board. I'm very impressed with your board. I'm impressed by your leadership, but in just looking at the names of the people joining us tonight, I also know a whole bunch of you have carried on different fights for this city throughout the years. And you're going to be needed. This has been a difficult period of 2020. 2021 was little better because of the pandemic. And of course, we still have concerns about the virus and what it will do. But maybe we can still work together. We can still communicate. We can still stand up for what matters. And I really see that this is what Historic Nashville has been doing so much in this century. I've been involved with all of this for a long time. And I can remember those giddy days of the festivals on Second Avenue. That was something I went to in the fall of 1985 as the easement program, as Caroline talked about, had just launched. And it was like, well, this is where we're starting. And it was such a change in preservation and how Nashville saw itself, because they tended to see itself through, famous people and famous historic houses. And I'm not devaluing any of those at all. They're part of our landscape and part of our history. But, they really didn't get at the guts of anything. It was more of a celebration of a few instead of building a city that could represent many, many more, and also create opportunities for many, many more. And then I can remember the sort of times in the 1990s when, I would take visitors down to Second Avenue and Lower Broadway from other cities that would be into the university or just passing through. And, they were always like, did they always roll up the streets at 6 o'clock? Geez, this place is so dead. Well, 20 years later, we sort of pine for those days of buildings that you could still even see throughout the morass of people and the party wagons going down the streets. So, things have changed drastically, but the need for what you guys do in your organization is ever more paramount. And just keep that in mind. Now, I can be a damn good cheerleader, and I have been for a long time for a lot of these projects, because the MTSU Center for Historic Preservation, we can do certain things. Then there's certain things we can't do. And this is where your organization is so important. State government, the Tennessee Historical Commission, they can do a lot of things, they have, but then there's things that they can't do. And then Metro Historical Commission, the same is true for them. So, whatever time, funding, support you can give Historic Nashville is needed now more so than ever. So that's my cheerleading message. The other thing I wanted to share with you guys is what the Center for Historic Preservation has been up to and our concerns in this city over the last year. Of course, the thing I jumped on the most once I was asked to do it was to prepare the National Register nomination for the Exit In. That happened over the summer and in the fall, and we have just recently submitted it to the Tennessee Historical Commission. And this was after working closely with the property owners and Metro Historical Commission and all of the people who brought information, who had information. We know that there's a hearing coming up in a little over a week to the Metro Zoning Commission about that building, and I am confident it will go well and that process will move on. I fully agree with your agenda of working with Trey Bruce and doing the Music Road Trust Fund, excuse me. Trey was one of those who worked with me on the National Register nomination for RCA Studio A some 5 years ago. And, it's sort of amazing that that happened 5 years ago and what's been going on since then. So the pressure on the resources in this town, they've intensified immensely in this new century, and particularly in the last 10 years. And I really see little to suggest that that's going to wane anytime soon. Now, another project that we're supporting, and this is through the Tennessee Civil War National Heritage Area that we administer for the state, is the master planning at Fort Negley. We have funded $100,000 of that overall cost. That's not the whole cost of the master plan, but the heritage area felt it was important to emphasize that because very few places in the city better convey the storyline that we have been promoting now for 20 years of from Civil War to civil rights and building African-American communities, building infrastructure, and making sure the African-American stories and those neighborhoods are really understood, valued, and enhanced and preserved where the communities in those neighborhoods want those efforts to take place. We've been also working with Metro with the Cleveland Park neighborhood. I've been concerned about that area of Northeast Nashville now for some time. It is changing. That doesn't mean that the working class African-American character of that neighborhood needs to change. You've got just very important historic churches like Cleveland Park, Missionary Baptist Church, which is right next to Cleveland Park, the park itself. But that's just one of many different institutions that, again, without those, we will have a greatly diminished Nashville. And I see it very much an equivalent to the support we have given African-American churches and then property owners in the Edge Hill neighborhood over the last few years. The changing of Nashville neighborhoods, the redevelopment of Nashville neighborhoods, and we have to admit, the historic preservation of Nashville neighborhoods also introduce the potential of change that is difficult to reverse. It's easier to repair a building than when you displace a population that grew there, nurtured there, and still have great identity and meaning there. So that's where we've been putting some of our efforts this year. I know I want to convey to everyone here, we want to do what we can, when we can, to assist your efforts. Be that cheerleading, be that research, be that national register work, be that what we can do. We're entering a really sort of transitional time at the center because I'm chairing this Tennessee 250th Commission. And what that could mean for not only Nashville, but everywhere across the state, well, we don't know yet. But I've just come from a series of 3 public meetings, one this morning at the Tennessee Historical Commission here in Nashville. I'm doing one tomorrow in Memphis, and an online discussion and trying to get people's ideas on Thursday. And one thing that's already come up is, hey, we did a lot of preservation work during the bicentennial in 1975, 76, 77. Shouldn't that be the same way in 2025, 26, and 27? And I was so pleased to hear people bring that to the table, that they realized that had been an important period of historic preservation activity. So I can't tell you that help is immediately on the way. What the federal government will do with this anniversary, what the state government will do, is difficult to predict in 2021 when it's 2026 that we're aiming at. But keep in mind the role that our historic neighborhoods and historic places and buildings play in that narrative of making a more perfect union. So many Nashville places are central to that storyline. If you think of the Hermitage Hotel and the women's suffrage movement, if you think of the lectures from Booker T. Washington at the Ryman Auditorium, if you think of our historic schools and colleges, our historic churches, the role of Will Edmondson over in Edge Hill, you know, these are narratives that are also part of our story and celebration and commemoration of the Declaration of Independence. So I think it's a really important time. I think you guys are doing a bang-up job. I'm proud to be a member of Historic Nashville. I'm proud to do whatever we can at the Center for Historic Preservation to assist the efforts in Nashville. But you know, I have felt for some time, Nashville's in good hands as far as its preservation. You guys are truly impressive. You're doing really groundbreaking, I think, nationally significant work in protecting the easements and keeping that at the forefront on 2nd Avenue. So never doubt yourselves. You're doing well. I know there's a lot to do. I know it seems endless. And I know you think sometimes you're just voices in the wilderness, but there's support out there. There are people who understand, and please keep doing what you're doing. Thank you. And now I think I turn it over to someone else. And I think that's back to Elizabeth or to Brian. So I'm sorry if I've got that wrong. I'm not great on transitions.
I think we're going to turn it over to Brian Mansfield.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm Brian Mansfield. Pending your votes tonight, I am the incoming president succeeding Elizabeth. I am in my 3rd year on the board and 2nd year leading the advocacy committee, which is part of what I'm doing tonight, bringing you the announcement of the Nashville 9. To tell you a little bit about myself, I am a Nashville native. My parents met in the late 50s at David Lipscomb College. I've lived here pretty much all my life, and I have a 35-year history as a journalist, having worked for places including the Nashville Scene, the Tennessean, and USA Today. I have a specific fascination with Nashville's geographic musical history, especially in the areas beyond Music Row and Lower Broad, because people not only worked here, but they also lived here, and there are stories to be told all over this town, from Spring Hill to Madison to Bellevue. It's not, in terms of the musical history, it's not just about the very well documented areas of Music Row and downtown. I do want to move on to the announcement of this year's Nashville 9. Ashley is supposed to give us some slides as we start doing this. Numbers. So the Nashville 9 is a selection that we do each year of 9 properties or neighborhoods that are endangered or threatened either by development or neglect or other means. And this year, we start with really numbers 1 through 4. We've kind of already addressed, because those are 170, 172, 174, and 176 2nd Avenue North. These are the 4 properties that Caroline talked in some detail about a little bit earlier. And it didn't occur to us last year when we were listing our Nashville 9 that just a few weeks later, something would happen that would endanger enough properties to fill the entire Nashville 9 this year. We have chosen to focus on the 4 buildings that are the most at risk, or in the case of 172, going to require demolition. So this is as much trying to bring attention to these properties as it is, in the case of 172, listing in memory of that building. And as Caroline mentioned, we have easements on these 4 properties. There are plans in place for rebuilding or redevelopment of those buildings. And with the preservation easements that we carry, HNI has made a commitment that these precious pieces of our history are protected in perpetuity. And we urge those implementing the rebuilding to make sure the buildings retain as much of their historic and architectural integrity as possible. Number 5 is the Elks Lodge, number 1102 at 2614 Jefferson Street. Since 1968, this concrete block building has housed the Elks Lodge, which is an important part of the Jefferson Street community. Before that, though, it was an integral part of the area's live music scene as Club Baron. From the 1950s to the 1960s, this club booked the likes of B.B. King, Muddy Waters, Ray Charles, Little Richard, Fats Domino, and Etta James. The mural that you see on the side there commemorates a legendary 1963 duel between Jimi Hendrix and a local blues guitarist named Johnny Jones, who was said to have won the showdown, partly because Hendrix was still developing the sound that he would make internationally famous in just a few years, but also because Jones had the better amplifier. Like many buildings in the North Nashville area, this structure suffered damage during the March 2020 tornado and has other needs that need addressing as well. And we are hoping that an influx of funds, bringing some attention to this building, will help take care of that so that it doesn't need to be torn down and replaced in the future. Number 6 is the Patton Brothers Funeral Home at 1306 South Street. And this Victorian style structure is one of the most historically significant Black funeral buildings still standing in Nashville. It's a reminder of the city's segregated past. Patton Brothers operated for nearly 70 years at this location, but the site's mortuary history actually goes back nearly a century. From the 1920s, it was the Zema W. Hill Funeral Home, run by a charismatic primitive Baptist evangelist whose marketing efforts included the placement of 2 snowball-toting concrete bears in front of the parlor. He also placed 2 others in front of his home on Edge Hill Avenue, and those are maybe the 2 more famous ones. Patton Brothers began in Franklin, Tennessee in 1882. They bought out Hill in 1952 when he decided to retire, and the business continued there for many years. A new owner has purchased the property earlier this year, and we're concerned that this is going to put that building in danger of demolition. With number 7, we over to the Music Row area for the Southern Ground Nashville studio at 114 17th Avenue South. This is a studio currently owned by musician Zach Brown for the past decade, but it began life as a Sunday school building for the Addison Avenue Cumberland Presbyterian Church 120 years ago. The congregation bought the property, which is at the southeast corner of Addison Avenue, now 17th Avenue South, and McGavick Street in 1897. They worshiped there from 1901 until 1950. The building subsequently housed the Nashville School of Fine Art, the Nashville Royal Order of Moose Lodge, and Veterans of Foreign Wars Clubhouse before Monument Records head Fred Foster purchased it in 1968 and transformed it into a recording studio. Monument artists such as Chris Christopherson and Larry Gatlin recorded their early albums at the studio. Sammy Smith cut her version of Christopherson's Help Me Make It Through the Night there, and Tom T. Hall recorded Homecoming at this studio. During part of the 1970s and 1980s, it operated as Youngin Studios. Zach Brown bought the building in 2012 and renovated it. In the past decade, his band has recorded there, along with acts ranging from Casey Musgraves and Dwight Yoakam to Megadeth and Foo Fighters. Brown put the studio on the market recently, putting the future of both the studio and the structure in question, because even though he did an amazing job of renovating it, as anybody that's lived in this town for the last 10 years has known, once somebody new buys a property in the Music Row area, there's no telling what will happen to it. Number 8, we go downtown. And this is a little bit of a different story with the Woolworth building at 221 Fifth Avenue North. The interior of this building is currently undergoing extensive renovations as it prepares to reopen next year as the Woolworth Theater. And we applaud the uses that keep this site accessible to the public, but we also want to remind the current occupants that they are stewards of one of the most important places in this city's history. Built in the 1890s, this building was occupied for 80 years, from 1913 to 1993, by the retailer F.W. Woolworth Company. In 1960, it became the focal point of efforts to desegregate Nashville's lunch counters. Because of these events, the Woolworth building is now a National Historic Site. The previous tenant, the Woolworth on Fifth restaurant, sought to preserve as much of the original interior architecture as possible and emphasize this history before closing last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As the current tenants prepare for the next chapter in the story of this site, we recommend that they bring in a scholar of 20th century American history with a specialization in the civil rights movement or Black freedom struggle, a trained historic preservationist, and a conservator who can assist with the identification and care of the building's remaining historic elements. Sometimes historic preservation encompasses not only a building's exterior, but also respect for the interior where historic events took place. And finally, for number 9, this is a building that is seeing its second time on the Historic Nashville's Nashville 9. Known to many as the old Jim Reeves showroom, this 1920s brick warehouse building was originally part of the Coca-Cola bottling works at 1525 Church Street. In the late 1970s, the soft drink bottling plant was converted for use as Jim Reed's automobile dealership. Located in Midtown, the building is an excellent example of ornate industrial architecture from the earliest 20th century, and perhaps Nashville's last remaining historic soft drink bottling plant. Members of the community are worried that this historic Landmark could be demolished for new development. In the 1990s, part of the building was converted into a nightclub. As I said, the plant previously appeared on the 2014 Nashville 9, and with downtown high-rise development now jumping the interstate and extending along the West End Church Street corridor, the likelihood that this building will be demolished in the future is increasing. And so those are your Nashville 9 for 2021. And I want to thank everybody for staying with us tonight. I want to thank Elizabeth and Caroline and Ashley for all of the work that they have brought to this meeting, and for Asia and Elise, who I hope will soon join me on the board as officers on the board. And so now I want to throw it back to Ashley, who I believe has the results of the board election.
All right, the board slate has been unanimously approved. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is a great meeting, and we really appreciate everyone attending.